Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. In the last part we finished off the gym here in Moss Deep City, getting our 7th of the 8 gym badges, and then a giant green laser erupted from the ocean, so now we can actively gain access to our next major plot destination. In specific, I don't only want to just explore the nearby water routes and their underwater areas that we can now access with Dive. I also want to come over here to explore a small side area, as well as gain access to our next 2 towns actually. One of which we're going to need to get to relatively soon in plot anyway, but I want to access a lot of them now just so I have them as fly destinations sooner rather than later. Right now though, it's time for our first new Pokemon. This is Camerupt. Camerupt evolves from Numel at level 33. It is a fire ground type, meaning it is weak to ground and water, but immune to electric. For some reason growing up, I thought this Pokemon was a defense-focused line, which felt weird given how fragile it seemed to be, but it's like, hey, it's fragile for a reason, it's an attacker. In specific, Camerupt is a really good mixed attacker with both of its attack stats being over 100. So if you want to use a fire type, and you don't choose Blaziken or Torchic at the start of the game, Camerupt can do a lot for you, honestly. Notably, here in Gen 6, it does get a Mega Evolution, though, like Sharpedo, which I haven't even mentioned that having a Mega yet, you actively can't gain access to it in either version of Omega Ruby or Alpha Sapphire until post-game. But specifically, Mega Camerupt does boost its attack by 20 points, defense by 30, special attack by 40, and its special defense by 30. But it actively cuts its speed in half, so it's slower because of that. With that said, it's strong enough where that's a really good Mega Evolution. Ability-wise, Camerupt by default could have Magma Armor, so it couldn't be frozen, which wasn't a great starting ability. But starting in Gen 4 Beyond, it also gained access to Solid Rock, where any incoming damage from super effective moves for a Camerupt that has the damage taken cut by a quarter, which, given how comparatively low Camerupt's defenses are, can be a really good boon. But what I especially really like is its hidden ability, Anger Point. Pokemon with Anger Point, if they get hit with a critical hit, have their physical attack stat boosted to the max value of +6 stages. Even if they're at -6 stages, it's sent right on up there. And while technically Camerupt is slightly more special leaning, it's good enough with its moveset where you can get a lot of use out of that. And notably, Mega Camerupt in specific changes all those abilities into Sheer Force. Whereas we've already talked about, if a move has an added effect, that added effect is removed, but its damage is boosted to compensate. I didn't like Camerupt a lot when I was growing up, and ultimately it's still not a fire type I reach for immediately. But you could do a hell of a lot worse, honestly. Welcome to Shoal Cave, though. This is a bit of a interesting little side area. Because this cave is actively 2 caves in one, in which layout you're facing depends on what time you enter it. Here in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, I believe it depends on the system clock, but back in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, it depended on the time that you had the analog clock set to in your room at the start of the game, and if you change that otherwise. Dependent on the time you enter this dungeon, it's either going to be at high tide or low tide. We're at high tide right now, so the lower floors are completely flooded and we have no way to access them, but there's some sections up here on the higher sections we can now access due to the water. Are you planning on going deep in there? How about bringing me back some shoal salt and shoal shells? I can make you something good if you bring me those items. Because we're here at high tide, we can actively do a side quest with this old man, where if we bring him 4 shoal salts and shoal shells, which is surprisingly hard to say without slipping up, we'll actively get an item you can get a couple of from if you just come back here every couple of days, because I believe the salts and shells do respawn on a specific periodic basis. And you want to do this at least once here in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, as we'll also get a Mega Stone from him the first time we do this. So, as for the schedule here at Shoal Cave, from 3 a.m. till 8:59 a.m. it is low tide. From 9 a.m. to 2:59 p.m. it is high tide. From 3 p.m. till 8:59 p.m. it is low tide. And from 9 p.m. all the way until 2:59 a.m. it is high tide again. I believe that's the block I recorded this chunk of footage in. So that's a grand total of 4 tide shifts every single day here in Shoal Cave, albeit the 4th time slot is divided in half across one day and the next. Most prominent thing to note Pokemon-wise, if you want to try and catch anything, is that if you wanted to have a Spheal for your team at all because of how I talked that Pokemon up, you have to wait until now to actually catch one. With that said, they're decently common, whether or not you're just walking around in the cave section or otherwise. Also, actually, to slightly correct something I said earlier, While we are here to get the shoal shells, we actively can't get the shoal salts until we come back at low tide later on, which I'm not going to do immediately after this. In fact, having edited the next several parts already, we're probably not doing this until we're either in the late 20s or maybe even all the way into the 30s in the part number, as I want to get a move on and I don't want to just sit here not doing anything for 6 hours waiting for the tide to shift again. So we do need to do 2 laps of the place. With that said, coming here at high tide to start is ultimately, I think, the safer option, as it's a much shorter loop to get around there than if you're trying to go all the way down through it at low tide, as that cave is deceptively large, as we'll talk about much later on. For right now, it's time for us to move on south from Moss Deep City onto Route 127. Now, if you're just going here for progression, this is just another route you can just kind of blaze on through, not to worry about a lot of the trainers, but since I'm going for as many trainers as I can and as many items as I can, we're going to be here for a little bit. But along the way, Mortis reached level 37, so now it's time for her to evolve into what's going to be her final phase for this LP, Dusclops. Still a pure ghost type, so it's weak to ghost and dark, but immune to normal and fighting. Dusclops, for a second stage Pokemon, has 130 in both of its defense stats, meaning it's a really good tank even early on. But my original goal was to evolve it again after this. With that said, the final evolution of this line, Dusknoir, actively requires trading while holding a specific item. While I was prepping for the LP, I completely forgot that that item is in post-game. So, Mortis is going to be a Dusclops for the remainder of the game anyway because of that. But also, it was before I discovered the issues with trading on this fork of Citra, so kinda out of luck for that. Oh well. Slight bummer is that Dusclops is on its feet, so it actively loses the levitate ability upon evolving, so it is no longer immune to ground, but in its place it now gains the ability Pressure, which, as we talked about before, actively doubles the PP usage of any opponent Pokemon, which in some cases can honestly be a really good boon, and is still a really good ability. I just kind of wish I had a way to keep Levitate instead. With that said, if you have the hidden ability on a Duskull and you evolve it, it still keeps that hidden ability. It's still Frisk as of evolving into a Dusclops. Yeah, had I known about that issue with trading ahead of time, I probably would have actively caught a Shuppet instead back at Mount Pyre and evolved it into a Bayonet, as that is ultimately a little more along the lines of what I would usually do, but honestly, a Dusclops is still really good. Hell, technically, in some regards, it can be better than its evolution, as you can use an Eviolite on it and make it an even better tank, as its boosted defense from the Eviolite is higher than the boosted defenses it would get from evolving. With that said, time for another new Pokemon. This is Snorunt, a pure ice type, so it's weak to fighting, rock, steel, and fire. Snorunt isn't a lot to write home about as it is. All of its stats are equal at 50, which means it doesn't have any real weaknesses outside of those stats being comparatively low as a first stage Pokemon, but it doesn't have any real strengths either. Ability-wise, it can have Inner Focus, Ice Body, or Moody. Inner Focus, we've talked about before, prevents flinching. Ice Body will heal the Pokemon if the Hail Weather status is in effect, but that hidden ability, Moody, is a bit of an iffy one. It can either play in your favor a lot, or really go against you, depending entirely on luck. What it does is that at the end of every turn, Moody randomly selects one stat of the Pokemon that has it to raise up 2 stages, and then it selects another stat to lower 1 stage at complete random. So depending on the luck of the draw, that can be a really good boon to make your Pokemon stats that it actively uses get much better, or it can take away its main highlight and make it much less effective in battle. I don't like to using it, but I assume if you're better with luck and all that, or you're more trusting of it, it could get really good. Worth noting, Snorunt has 2 potential end state evolutions. It had one to start in Gen 3, and then Gen 4 added another one with the Dawn Stone. The main evolution it has via leveling up, I go back and forth on, but it did get better as time went, especially here in Gen 6, because it got a really good serving Mega Evolution. But if you go the other route using a Dawnstone, you get a Ice Ghost type Pokemon that actively specializes in its speed and is a decent mixed attacker on top of that. Personally, if you're going to use a Snorunt, I would recommend going the Ice Ghost type route, but I'll talk more about that when and if we eventually see one of those Pokemon across the rest of the LP. Now, a moment ago, we ended up finding the Heracronite on that beach. That allows you to Mega Evolve the Gen 2 Bug Fighting type Pokemon Heracross into Mega Heracross. But I'm going to hold off on talking about that Mega Evolution for now, because we're going to run into a Heracross for the first time this LP in the relatively near future, so it's just better for me to save it until then, I think. So the issue that I talked about already about finding items underwater really comes into play this part and the next part, because there's a lot of dive routes on the routes that are directly south or southeast of Moss Deep and Lily Cove. And it makes sense why, because in order to access one of the upcoming towns, you need to actively use dive. But if you're trying to be completionist about grabbing as many items as you can, it can get tedious really quick just trying to hover around the vicinity you know the item is, and it's just not, for some reason, registering where it is or should be. Again, finding items underwater is really clunky. There is a part of me that wishes there was a specific dowsing machine-like item for underwater, but that would be so comparatively niche in use, despite how many water routes there are, that it would fall out of use pretty quickly in comparison, I think. I guess a good way to do it may have been maybe just some sort of key item that you could find in an area we can actively now go back to, the Sea Mauville, now that we have dive. And maybe have it mark items that are underwater with a sparkle or something like that, but that would have just been a neat little reward to have for that area, I suppose, and ultimately it's not really needed because most of the items down there aren't exactly that great. Alright, next new Pokemon here is Pinsir, the Gen 1 bug type, so it's week 2, Flying, Rock, and Fire. Pinsir's moveset I remember not liking too much back when I was playing the games when I was younger, but nowadays, if memory serves, it's a decent physically based Pokemon with a good attack stat, decent speed, and good physical defense. But here in Gen 6 especially, it got well served by Mega Evolution. In terms of abilities, base Pinsir can either have Hyper Cutter, Mold Breaker, or Moxie. I know for a fact we've talked about the first two by this point. I forget if we've talked about Moxie, though, so just in case. What Moxie does is that it boosts the physical attack of the Pokemon with that ability by 1 stage anytime it takes out a Pokemon. So if you're really good at doing a lot of damage quickly, this will make later battles even more efficient. So Mega Pinsir. In Mega Evolving, the Pokemon actively gains a Flying subtype, so it's now weak to Flying, Rock, Fire, Electric, and Ice, but immune to Ground, but now notably Rock is a 4 times weakness. But in Mega Evolving, Pinsir gains another 30 attack, 20 defense, 10 special attack, 20 special defense, and 20 speed. That's really good stat bonuses alongside the moves it can learn from memory. My only real back and forth notion with Mega Pinsir is its ability that it changes over to is Aerialate. What Aerialate does is that it changes any normal type moves that Mega Pinsir knows and changes them into flying type moves so they actively have same type attack bonus. And that's on top of a 30% power boost to the move itself. So between that, the stab, and the attack stat boost that Mega Evolution gives Pinsir, that's a really good setup, but there's times I kind of wish I had Moxie on Mega Pinsir instead. That is something I will give Mega Evolutions as like a potential strategic nerf in some cases, where because they almost always have a set ability, there's times you might prefer the main or hidden abilities that a Pokemon can learn over their Mega Evolution ability. And in that regard, I can appreciate Mega Evolutions for that level of strategy, but I still kind of just don't like using them to begin with. So at this point, notably underwater, we're starting to find the plate items. We've seen those before in these Pokemon LPs, namely back in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. There are 18 of those scattered across the underwater sections here on the eastern third of Hoenn, and each of them matches with a Pokemon type. For instance, the Dread Plate, I believe, matches with the Dark type? And if you give that to a Pokemon that has a move of that type, its power is boosted by 20%. On top of that, if you happen to trade up from prior games, Pokegod themselves, Arceus, both Arceus' own type and the type of the move Judgment will change to the matching type as well if they're holding one of the plates. Not something I really take too much advantage of, though I do believe I give Chris the water equivalent plate at some point down the line. But it's a good enough boost where it's worth having them around. Time for our next new Pokemon, though. This is Ludicolo. This evolves from Lombre if you use a Water Stone on them, so this is the final form of Lotad. Water Grass type, so it's weak to Flying, Poison, and Bug. Ludicolo is a decent special defender with good special attack on top of it. I've loved using this as my water type across Hoenn all over the place over the years, and it's still really good nowadays. Ability-wise, Ludicolo can have Swift Swim, Rain Dish, or Own Tempo. I kind of go back and forth over which one I prefer in this case, though. Own Tempo definitely has its advantages, especially for just avoiding self-damage. But the Swift Swim speed boost or the restoring HP from Rain can also be really good. The big issue is whether or not I actively plan on using Rain at all, which I really go back and forth on really using any kind of weather effect at all in these games unless it's a secondary effect from another move. I feel like the only time I've actively used like Rain Dance specifically anytime recently was actually very recently for a very specific challenge in the second Scarlet Violet DLC. I partnered that with a specific new Pokemon for that DLC to get its signature move out on 1 turn rather than 2. Given we're watching this battle, though, it's time for our next new Pokemon already, and this one's a little bit irresponsibly used by this Ace Trainer, as it's going to throw a Pokemon that's 4 times weak to water out into an ocean. Specifically, this Ace Trainer is going to throw out Rhydon. This evolves from Hoenn at level 42. Ground Rock type still, so it's weak to Fighting, Ground, Steel, Water, Grass, and Ice, but immune to Electric at least. Water, as I mentioned, is a 4 times weakness, as is Grass. Rhydon is a really good physical Pokemon. Good HP, good physical defense, really good physical attack. It honestly didn't even really need an evolution, but they did give it one in Gen 4, but it is another trade-based evolution when it's holding a specific item. With that said, if you actively get that evolution, you get an even better version of Rhydon, effectively, so worth it. Notably, ability-wise, Rhydon can have Lightning Rod, Rockhead, or Reckless, and all 3 of them are really good, honestly. I think if I had to choose one, I would go for Rockhead or Reckless, but Lightning Rod's still really good. And it's again time for our next new Pokemon. This is my beloved Crobat. This evolves from Golbat when it's leveled up with a high enough friendship value. Poison flying type, so it's weak to Rock, Electric, Psychic, and Ice, but immune to Ground. Crobat is okay at attacking and okay at defending. The main value of it is that it is really fast, 130 speed in specific, making it consistently one of the highest rated Pokemon in speed consistently, because I think Zubat's available in damn near every game in the series outside of, I want to say, Unova. It's got a good learn set, and its 2 abilities are pretty good too. It can either have Inner Focus, which, as we talked about before, prevents flinching, or Infiltrator, which allows you to get through certain status buffs like Reflect and all that. If I had to choose one, I would probably go for Infiltrator if it was easier to get, but honestly, Inner Focus is also really good. I've used a Crobat in a prior Pokemon LP. I really recommend it. The only reason I'm not using one this LP is because of a rule I think I brought up earlier in the LP. I know I talked about the one where I only like to have at most 2 party slots dedicated to Pokemon from prior generations so I can experiment around with the new ones and show them off a little better. But in case I haven't talked about the secondary rule yet, and this is more for the LP side of things, I want to only use every Pokemon once in a Pokemon LP so they don't dominate every team I'm in. The only exception to that being my favorite Pokemon ever, which is the Water type I've talked about endlessly, and if you went back and watched those other 2 LPs, you know exactly what it is. Is that plainly favoritism? Yes, I openly admit it is. But look, it's a really good Water type, okay? So, Route 126 is probably where there's some of the most dive spots for you to access other sub-areas with. And while there's a lot to do here, the main thing you really want to do, the main reason I'm over here right now, is that this is where our next city is. It's that giant, slightly different colored rock in the center of the route. I'm not entering it for a few moments, but I'd recommend going there first before moving on to the next plot destination, just so you have it as a fly destination for when we eventually need to come back here later on. For right now, though, I guess we could talk about this. Let's talk about the water routes in Hoenn in general, as I want to say they're probably one of the more divisive chunks of the game on the whole. And honestly, I get why. They get samey really quickly. Some of them are much wider than they need to be, but also some of them are much shorter than they probably should be. They're just a very weirdly implemented part of the route, the region in general, rather, in my eyes. Especially back in the original Gen 3, where, if memory serves, surfing speed was equivalent to walking, so you got through it at a very sluggish pace, and the encounter rate was ridiculous. Here in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they definitely toned that down a bit. For one thing, the encounter rate on water feels much lower. In fact, the encounter rate in general feels much lower across the game universally. But also, they definitely fixed the surfing speed issue, as not only is surfing in general now the speed of your run animation rather than your walk animation, but Sharpedo and the one other Pokemon having faster surf speeds means you really do blaze through the water routes a lot faster than you did back when. But there's still a bit of a point in the game where it feels rather aimless because of the setup here. Hell, there's a good chunk of these routes you never need to visit, as there's an entire optional town along the southern edge of Hoenn that we'll be taking a look at in a few parts. It definitely makes the Hoenn region feel much larger, but I would say to a point it is to a detriment, at least back on the Game Boy Advance. It did lead to one of the bigger memes about the game, though, when a specific IGN review, who, future me, go and get the name of the reviewer in specific so I actively credit this properly. Their main detractions with the game were too many HMs, which, hey, fair. I'm not the biggest fan of HM implementation, especially in Gen 3 and 4 to begin with. But it was also 7.8 out of 10 too much water, specifically, which I have my issues with IGN. I think they're kind of a corporate mass that has way too many people to review games, and thus they don't have a very solid consensus on taste and all that. But I feel like that's a little unfair in both directions. Because, like, a 7.8 is still a really good score. And hey, people feel what they feel about games. But I feel like the fan base really kind of clung on to that a little hard for no real reason. Because even as someone who likes Hoenn, I don't like the water routes, and they are one of my biggest issues with the game. I don't know, something about that situation, even at the time, kind of put a bad taste in my mouth that I can't really quite parse with words. For right now, though, time for our next new Pokemon. This is Whale Lord. This evolves from Whalmer at level 40. Pure water type, so it's weak to grass and electric. Whale Lord has a ridiculous HP stat and some really good attack stats on top of that. It's not the best defender, but with that HP, it doesn't really matter. Ability-wise, it can either have Water Veil, Oblivious, or Pressure, all three of which we talked about before. What's notable is that, to this day, Whale Lord is one of the largest Pokemon at 47 feet and 7 inches, making it the largest terrestrial Pokemon in the franchise, to date, at least. There is a Pokemon larger than Whale Lord, and notably because it has two different forms, it's larger than it twice, but that thing isn't from this planet, so doesn't exactly count as a terrestrial Pokemon. I guess the big way I can phrase my thoughts on the water routes in Hoenn is that they get monotonous really quickly, which is an issue in gaming in general if there's too much of one aesthetic in a row. Memories of friends that play Dragon Age getting really tired of that one cave that's all over the place in Dragon Age 2 apparently comes to mind. So it's not really an issue with Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire specifically as it is with Hoenn in general. They placed too many water routes in the game all at the same point in the game. So it just kind of gets tiring really quick, I guess is a good way to put it. Because if you look throughout the rest of Hoenn, for instance, you start in a generalized foresty area. It's pretty normal for the series, but then you're quickly on like the ocean, then you're in some cities, then you're back on some plains, then you're near some volcanic regions and all that. Then you're in some rainforests, and then it's just water for a good chunk after that. And it gets tiring fast. Not helping that, admittedly, is the Pokemon variety, which is a little bit better here in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire than it was in Ruby Sapphire Emerald. But you're still seeing a lot of Magikarps, Staryus, Barboaches, Whiscaches, Gyarados, Spheals and Celios. You see a lot of them really quickly. So that right there is the Secret Islet. That is a secret base location that's a decently wide room if memory serves that you could just fly to at any point in time. There's a couple areas like that once you reach the ocean chunk of Hoenn where if you go a specific route, you can find a bunch of secret bases that are decent ones to use in general for sizing and all that. Hell, one specific area on the very southeast chunk of the ocean here is arguably the best place to put a secret base in the game, especially if you have friends, as you could all just have your secret bases immediately next to each other. Or if you're trying to grind out the 1,000 flag captures for the Megastone back in Aaron, it goes a long way. But since we're not really worrying about secret-based stuff in this playthrough, that's just more of a footnote I wanted to make note of and actively grab the destination for as well. It's not super important. Hey, I might as well, you know. Also worth noting, I believe every single Pokemon trainer that's underwater, at least here in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you do have to talk to in order to prompt a battle. I don't think there's any that can just spot you and swim over to you. That may have been the case back in Ruby Sapphire Emerald, but it's been a little bit, I won't lie. Since I didn't really bother with diving too much on that playthrough of Emerald I did on stream when I was doing the Heart Gold Soul Silver playthrough, I don't quite remember if there was anything of real note down there when it came to the trainers like that. Welcome to Sutopolis City. This is actively the location of our 8th gym, but we're actively not able to do the gym battle here yet until we've actively done a good bit of plot still. I'm more here to grab this place as a fast travel destination so we can come back here in the relatively near future once we're actively prompted to. I could maybe go around and grab the items here as well, but I'm actually going to save that for our main visit here as well, just so it's a little more relevant to what we're actively doing. For right now, before we head back to our exploration of the ocean, I'm going to head back here to that one guy on Route 124 and trade all the shards we've gotten throughout our ocean exploration thus far, just to get all the elemental stones I can from it. Not that I'm going to need them anytime soon, but I figured I might as well, you know? So our next destination is Route 128, which, get this, is directly next to Route 127. It's directly due south of Mossdeep, just even further. That is actively where our next plot destination is, and while we'll be able to see our next plot destination, I'm not actively investigating it until, I want to say, the latter half of next part, if memory serves. There is one specific location I really want to take a look at down here that we don't need to access until even after the next gym. but I just want to take care of the trainers along the way, as hey, that means I'll be as prepared as I can be for upcoming events. So this little crater right here is where we saw those two people talking about the laser beam that erupted from the ocean earlier. We are actively at our plot destination right now. But notably, there's also an adamant orb here on top of this. In order to actually access what we're here for plot, you need to dive down in the area surrounding this little ring and then go into the cave directly in front of you. But we're not going to do that again until next part. So the adamant orb. I think I've been wrong about this item for several years, I won't lie. In my memory, it's that any Pokemon using it has their Dragon and Steel type moves boosted by 20%. But all the research I've done for the actual recording of commentary says it's just the Pokemon that it matches with, Dialga, the Pokemon of Time from Sinnoh. So if I'm wrong about that, oops, but hey, if you have that Pokemon, a really good boon to find there. I do find it kind of funny, they just throw all of the Gen 4 legendary items underwater, really, between the plates and the orbs, but worth noting all the same. For now, next new Pokemon is Golem. This is a Generation 1 Rock Ground type. This evolves from Graveler if you trade it. Golem has a really good physical defense stat, and good physical attack on top of that as well. In fact, it even got better at physically attacking here in Gen 6 Beyond. Being Rock Ground, it's of course weak to Fighting, Ground, Steel, Water, Grass, and Ice, and those 4 times weaknesses from Grass and Ice can definitely be a bit of an issue given how common those are. Heck, pre-physical specialist, but that was especially an issue given how comparatively low Golem's special defense was. But in modern context, this is a really usable physical tank. Ability-wise, it can either have Rock Head, Sturdy, or Sand Veil. Sturdy is probably what I would recommend, but Rock Head is still really good. Sand Veil could have its uses, but I don't like using the weather-adjacent effects to begin with, so it's not really one for me. I think out of the Generation 1 trait evolutions, even though I think this is the funniest looking, it's probably the one I've used the least over the years. As not only does it have the most weaknesses off the top of my head, but Machamp's higher physical attack is just much more my speed. And I've talked up Gengar and Alakazam a lot over the years for good reason. To this day, they're still really good trait evolutions. Getting a generation ahead of us here, technically, but I'm much more a fan of the Generation 7 Alolan variant of the Geodude line, as the typing change on top of the new abilities just made especially Golem a lot more interesting to use and usable in my eyes, but I'll save more of that for when we eventually get to Alola in like a decade at this rate, probably. Immediately, though, this Ace Trainer is sending out our final new Pokemon for the part. This is Raichu. This evolves from Pikachu when you use a Thunderstone on it. Pure electric type outside of the Alola region, so it is weak to ground exclusively. Raichu is a really fast mixed attacker with a good learn set to back it up, especially as the generations advanced. I've used Raichu several times over the years. It's probably one of my favorite electric types in general. Alola especially admittedly gave this Pokemon a good boost through its Alolan variant, but we'll again save that for when I reach Gen 7. Ability-wise, it only really has static from memory, but hey, free paralysis proc here and again is nothing to really sneeze at. I really like using the Raichu line. With that said, I do usually get a Raichu decently late in case I actively catch a Pikachu, as I like to make sure I get the best moves I can on it before it evolves, just due to the thing with most stone-based evolutions, not really learning any more moves from level up after the initial evolution. But like, hey, a Thunder from a Raichu, that's gonna hurt anything that can actively be damaged decently by electric type. So the main thing I'm going to do now before we go end off the part is I'm going to take advantage and explore this route to the east of us right now. Not that we need to, we actively can't do anything of note down there yet outside of just clear out the Pokemon trainers and grab whatever items are either underwater or on the surface. But I'm doing this more to showcase our eventual order of actions as we get closer to the main end game. As hey, we only have a gym badge left to go, we have a plot event to do, and really that'll be about it until we're able to actually go access endgame, at least for the main story. Peeling back the curtain a little bit, I actively haven't edited the story finale yet. If I had to guess, it's probably going to be around part 30. But we're also reaching the point in the footage pretty rapidly here where, because I screw off and do a lot of side stuff between the 8th gym and the endgame, I'm editing out a lot of footage very rapidly. So, what is a 2-hour recording session might turn into like 50 minutes of footage, so about a part and 2/3, and even then there might be some other editing on top of that, so So if you move east on Route 128, you find yourself on a very linear section of ocean with a bunch of Pokemon trainers that are pretty easy to get around here in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire because of how free your movement is on the water. But as you move through that, you find yourself at a loading zone that takes you to our next city of sorts. This loading screen takes us to Evergrande City. If you look on the map at this point, we are directly south of the Pokemon League, as well as Victory Road. With that said, we can't access that until we have the HM Waterfall, which we can't get until we defeat the 8th Gym Leader. So this is our endgame destination, but we don't have access to anything here quite yet. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 22, we're going to explore a little bit more of the ocean before we finally go check out what's deep underwater on Route 128. See you guys then.